The first time I saw him, I was standing at the kitchen sink just before midnight, rinsing off a plate and barely paying attention to the backyard. Then I looked up and stopped moving. Someone was standing near the back fence. He was tall, thin, and perfectly still, just outside the reach of the motion light. I couldn't make out his face, but I could tell he was turned toward the house, not toward the shed, not toward the gate, toward me. For a few seconds, I just stared, like my brain was refusing to understand what my eyes were seeing. Then I dropped below the window so fast I hit my shoulder on the cabinet. I stayed there in the dark, listening for footsteps, a rattle at the door, anything. Nothing came. I called the police and kept my voice low, as if the person outside might hear me through the glass. By the time officers arrived, the yard was empty. They searched the fence line, checked behind the shed, and walked the strip of brush behind the property. One officer clearly thought I'd mistaken a shadow for a person. The other found a cigarette butt near the fence, still dry even though the grass around it was damp. He held it up in his flashlight beam and looked back at the house. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. It meant I hadn't imagined him. I had only been in that house for 3 weeks. It was a cheap rental at the end of a cul-de-sac with a narrow backyard and a crooked wooden shed. During the day, the place felt ordinary. At night, the yard changed. The tree line behind the fence looked too close. The shadows seemed heavier than they should have been, and the motion light over the back door never fully reached the corners of the property. After that first night, I started locking the back door twice and checking the blinds every few minutes without meaning to. Nothing happened for 2 days. On the third night, the motion light turned on at 2:14 a.m. and stayed on. I woke up because the light leaked around the edges of my bedroom curtains. I sat there for a second, already tense before I even knew why. Then I got up, moved the curtain a fraction, and looked down into the yard. At first I thought it was empty. Then I saw him pressed against the wall beside the back door. He was standing so close to the glass that he had been hidden from view unless you looked at the angle just right. His head was tilted slightly, like he was listening to the inside of the house. I dropped to the floor and called 911. While I was whispering to the operator, I heard 3 soft taps on the back door. Not pounding, not knocking, tapping, deliberate, patient. 3 taps, then silence, then 3 more. The operator told me to stay hidden until officers arrived. I lay there on the carpet with one hand over my mouth, staring at my bedroom door and listening for the sound of the back door opening. It never did. When police searched the property again, he was gone. The next morning, I bought a security camera, extra locks, and a wooden dowel for the living room window. I spent the day installing everything, like I could hammer fear into something manageable. That lasted until 4:17 in the morning. I was sitting awake in bed with the camera feed open on my phone. The yard was black and grainy. The shed a crooked shadow at the edge of the frame. Then a figure stepped out from behind it, not creeping, not sneaking, just calmly walking into view as if he had been there for a while and had finally decided I should know it. He stopped in the center of the yard and faced the camera. Then he raised one hand and pointed directly at it. The screen turned to static. I ran to the living room and looked through the blinds toward the patio. The motion light was on. The yard looked empty. Then the back door handle slowly turned, stopped at the lock, and eased back into place. I called the police again. This time they found the camera hanging loose, its wire cut cleanly. One officer asked if I knew anyone who might be doing this to me. I said no at first. Then I thought of Darren. We had dated for maybe 4 months a year earlier. He had never hit me or threatened me directly. What made him unsettling was how he treated boundaries like small misunderstandings. He'd show up where I was without being invited and smile like it was romantic. If I didn't answer a message, he would send 5 more, each one gentler and somehow more unnerving than the last. When I ended things, he sent me texts that moved from apology to anger and back again so fast it felt like talking to different people. Then he disappeared. At least I thought he had. I gave the police his name and old messages. They said they'd look into it. For 2 nights after that, nothing happened. On the 3rd evening, I came home from work and knew something was wrong the second I stepped into the kitchen. The shed door in the backyard was open. I never used that shed. It was full of junk, and the swollen wood usually made the door stick shut. I knew I hadn't opened it. I stood there at the sink, staring through the window while every worst-case thought I had ever had crowded into my head at once. I called the police and didn't take my eyes off the shed. When officers arrived, they approached it with flashlights up and opened the door wider. One of them went silent immediately and motioned for the other. Inside, behind old paint cans and a broken rake, was a camping chair. Next to it were 2 empty water bottles, snack wrappers, and a folded blanket. Someone had been staying in there. Not passing through, staying. They found more after that. One loose board in the back fence that could be pushed aside just enough for a person to squeeze through. Prints in the dirt behind the shed. And under the chair, a small notepad inside a plastic freezer bag. Most of the pages were blank. The written ones were worse. Kitchen light off 11:43. Bedroom light on 1:08. Left for work 8:12. Home 6:21. No TV tonight. The officer reading it stopped and looked at me with a face I still remember. On the final page, there was just one line. Tonight, I think she'll let me in. I didn't go back into that house after that. The police took everything from the shed and arrested Darren the next day. He denied being there. He denied writing the notes. Then they searched his car and found black gloves, old printed photos of me, and a box of the same snack bars from the shed. People always focus on the threat of someone breaking in, the door handle, the taps on the glass, the line in the notebook. What still bothers me is something quieter. He wasn't rushing. He had made himself comfortable in my backyard. A chair, water, notes, a place to sit and watch the windows of my house night after night until my routine felt familiar to him. He learned when I slept, when I cried, when I watched television, when the rooms went dark. He was close enough to hear the house settle and patient enough to wait for the perfect night. And sometimes I still wake up thinking about those taps on the back door because they don't sound like a stranger trying to get in. They sound like someone reminding you he's already there tonight. I was 11 the summer my parents started sleeping with the television on. They said it was because the house felt too quiet after my older brother moved out, but I knew that wasn't true. Quiet had never bothered us before. We lived far enough outside town that silence was normal. The backyard opened into a stretch of dead grass, a drainage ditch, and a line of tall cottonwoods that made the fence look shorter at night than it did during the day. We had no close neighbors, no streetlights behind the house, and no reason to look outside after dark. That changed the night my mother saw someone standing by the swing set. At first, she didn't tell me. I heard it by accident when I came down for water and found both of my parents in the kitchen speaking in the low, careful voices adults use when they don't want a kid to hear something bad. My mom had both arms folded tight across her chest. My dad was looking through the glass of the back door with the porch light on, even though there was nothing out there. When they noticed me, the conversation stopped so abruptly it made my stomach tighten. My mom smiled too quickly and asked why I was up. I asked what happened. She said nothing happened. My dad said a raccoon got into the trash. I knew they were lying because our trash cans were out front and because my mother kept glancing at the yard behind me without meaning to, like she expected to see something again if she looked away too long. The next morning, I found muddy footprints under the kitchen window. They weren't clear enough to look dramatic, just partial marks in the soil under the flower bed where someone had stepped close to the wall. My father stood over them with a cup of coffee and said they were probably his from mowing. He hadn't mowed in a week. That was when I started paying attention. The first thing I noticed was how often the backyard light turned on for no reason. It was motion activated and mounted above the sliding door. Before that week, I barely ever saw it come on unless one of us let the dog out. Afterward, it would flash on at random times and bleach the kitchen in white light for maybe 20 seconds before clicking off again. Every time it happened, my dad would pause whatever he was doing and look outside. Every single time. He started checking the locks twice before bed, then 3 times. He moved the big mag light from the garage to the kitchen counter. He called the dog in earlier at night. And when the dog started refusing to go past the patio, my father stopped arguing with him and just let him back in. The dog was old and lazy but not nervous. He would bark at delivery trucks, squirrels, and thunderstorms. Then suddenly, he didn't want anything to do with the backyard after sunset. He'd stand at the open door, head low, ears back, breathing through his nose like he smelled something rotten out there. Once, my dad clipped on the leash and tried to walk him across the grass anyway. The dog planted all 4 paws and made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not exactly a growl, and not exactly a whine. My dad unclipped the leash without saying a word. 2 nights later, I saw it too. I woke up because my room was too bright. The backyard light was on again, pushing hard yellow through my curtains. I got up, pulled one corner back, and looked down into the yard. At first I thought the swing set was moving, then I realized someone was sitting on it, not swinging, just sitting on one of the plastic seats, perfectly still, facing the house. I remember the exact feeling that hit me. It wasn't a jump scare kind of fear, it was worse. It was the feeling of realizing something had already been happening for a while without you, like I had entered the middle of a story no one had wanted to tell me. The figure was dark, too far away to see details, but definitely a person. Too tall to be a child, shoulders narrow, hands down by their sides. The chains of the swing were straight and motionless. I left the curtain open a crack and backed away so fast I bumped into my desk. My father was in my room within seconds, maybe because I made a sound. Maybe because he'd been awake already. When I pointed toward the yard, he didn't ask what I meant. He just looked. His face changed immediately. He pulled me away from the window and told me to stay in my room. I didn't listen. I followed him down the hall and crouched near the top of the stairs while he went to the kitchen. My mother was already there, barefoot in her robe, staring toward the glass door. My father picked up the mag light, unlocked the door, and stepped onto the patio. I thought he was making a huge mistake. He shone the beam toward the swing set. It was empty. The chains were still moving. Not hard, just enough to catch the light. My dad crossed half the yard anyway, sweeping the flashlight in tight, angry circles. He checked behind the shed, along the fence, near the trees. There was no one there. Our dog stood inside the door behind him, barking once, then backing away with his tail tucked. The police came, walked the property, and found nothing. The next day, my father cut back the bushes near the fence and installed another motion light pointed toward the trees. He told me some idiot neighborhood kid was probably messing around. That would have made more sense if we'd had a neighborhood behind us. We didn't. There was the ditch, the trees, and then an empty service road almost nobody used. I asked my mom the truth that night while she was folding laundry. She sat down on the edge of my bed and took a long time to answer. Then she told me she'd seen someone twice before I did. The first time, she was washing dishes and looked up to see a person standing just beyond the porch light, near the bird bath, watching the house. She thought it was a trick of the dark until it moved one step backward and disappeared. The second time, she saw a face above the fence line near my window. Not a full face, just the top half. Eyes and forehead, like someone tall enough had stood on something to look in. She never told me because she didn't want to scare me. That worked out badly. After that, I stopped feeling safe anywhere in the house where there was a window behind me. I started checking the glass in reflections, expecting to see someone there. Even during the day, the backyard seemed wrong now. Too open in some places, too hidden in others. The swing set, which I hadn't used in years, became unbearable to look at. I kept imagining someone sitting there in daylight, calm as a visitor, waiting for evening to put him back where he belonged. 3 nights later, the dog started barking at 1:30 in the morning, not his usual bark. This was frantic. My parents were already moving by the time I got to my door. I heard my dad curse, heard the scrape of the kitchen chair against the floor, then my mother saying, "Don't open it, don't open that door." I went halfway down the stairs and looked. There was a hand on the outside of the sliding glass door. Just a hand, palm flat against the glass at shoulder height. The rest of the person was standing just beyond the frame where we couldn't see them. My mother made the kind of sound people make when they're trying not to scream, because screaming would make it real. My father grabbed the phone and called 911 without taking his eyes off the glass. The hand stayed there for maybe 5 seconds, then slowly slid away. The motion light went out. Not dimmed. Out, like someone had unscrewed the bulb. Police got there fast that time, but not fast enough. They found prints in the flower bed and marks near the side gate, though the gate itself was still latched from the inside. One officer walked beyond the fence line and found something in the ditch, a milk crate turned upside down below my bedroom window. That was how he had looked in. My father replaced every bulb outside, reinforced the gate, nailed the fence where it had warped, and bought cheap stick-on alarms for the windows. My mother started keeping the hallway light on all night. None of it made the house feel better. It just made it feel like we were preparing for something we still didn't understand. A detective came by 2 days later and asked if anyone had been having problems with a neighbor, an ex, a co-worker. Anybody. My parents said no. Then he asked if anything had been stolen. That was the strange part. Nothing had. Whoever it was never tried to break in while we were home, never took tools from the shed, never even opened the gate. He came to the backyard just to be there, to look in. to let us know he could get close. I think that made it worse for my father than if it had been a normal burglar. You can defend against someone who wants your things. You don't know what to do with someone who seems to want your fear. The last night was the worst because it started so quietly. No barking, no light, no sound from outside. I woke up because I heard my mother speaking in the hallway, not loudly, more like she was talking to herself. I opened my bedroom door and saw her standing at the end of the hall in her nightgown, staring down toward the kitchen. My father was beside her, and both of them were looking at something below. I stepped between them before either could stop me. The sliding door was covered, not broken, covered. Whoever had been coming into our backyard had taped newspaper across the entire outside of the glass while we slept, sheet after sheet, overlapping until there was no view left at all. Just a wall of gray paper pressed against the door from edge to edge. In the porch light leaking around the seams, I could see words and photos turned backward. It hit all three of us at once. He had stood there long enough to do that by hand, close enough to touch the house for several minutes, maybe longer, while we slept a few feet away. My father ran to the front door and outside along the side of the house, but there was no one there. Police came again. They pulled the paper down carefully and found tape, fingerprints too smeared to use, and one thing stuck under the final sheet at eye level, a Polaroid. It was a photo of our house taken from the backyard, not from the fence, from much closer. The angle was from beside the swing set, looking straight at the kitchen window. In the photo, the kitchen light was on and my mother was visible inside, turned sideways, drying a plate. The detective asked when it had been taken. None of us knew. That was the moment my parents decided we were leaving. Not eventually. Not after more locks. That day, my mother packed clothes. My father called my uncle. We stayed with relatives for 3 weeks while police increased patrols and the landlord agreed to let us break the lease. No one was ever arrested. A few months later, after we had moved, the detective called my father and said they had found something beneath the old swing set when the new tenants removed it. A shallow hole covered by loose dirt and leaves. Inside were cigarette butts, snack wrappers, and 3 more Polaroids sealed in a plastic bag. All of them were taken from the backyard. All of them showed the inside of the house. One was my father asleep in the recliner. One was me at the kitchen table doing homework. And the last one was the oldest. It showed the swing set in the foreground and my mother in the background standing at the sink. At the bottom of the photo, written in black marker, were 4 words. You looked outside first. By the time my father admitted someone had been in the backyard more than once, my little sister had already given him a name. She called him the Quiet Man. She was 7, the kind of kid who turned everything into something smaller and easier to hold. Thunder became sky bowling. The deep groan our old house made when the temperature dropped became the walls stretching. So when she told my mother there was a quiet man outside her window at night, nobody treated it like a real sentence at first. My mom thought she meant a dream. My dad thought she was trying to scare herself. I thought she had seen the shadow of the maple tree and let her imagination do the rest. Then she said, very calmly, "No, not a dream. He stands by the sandbox and looks in until I close my eyes." After that, nobody laughed. We had moved into that house in late October, thinking it would be a fresh start after a hard year. It was older than the places we'd lived before, but it had a big backyard, a low deck, and enough room for my sister's swing and plastic sandbox. My parents liked the privacy. There was a line of shrubs along one side, a wooden fence at the back, and beyond that, a narrow strip of undeveloped land that separated our street from another neighborhood. During the day, the yard felt safe in a plain suburban way. At night, it turned into layers of black shapes and weak reflections in the glass. The first thing that made my father uneasy wasn't my sister. It was the gate. The side gate leading into the backyard had a bad latch that didn't always catch unless you pulled it hard. My dad complained about it the first week we moved in and said he'd fix it over the weekend. But before he got around to it, he found it open one morning. Not wide open, just resting against the post. He shut it, tugged it twice, and blamed the wind. The next morning, it was open again. He replaced the latch himself, tested it 3 times, and made a point of showing my mother that it was fine. The next day, it was closed. The day after that, it was standing open by maybe 4 inches, enough to show the dark seam of the yard beyond it when my dad came downstairs for coffee. That was when he stopped mentioning wind. He started checking it before bed. Then he started checking it again when he woke up in the night to use the bathroom. If it had ended there, maybe we would have folded it into the category of strange house behavior and moved on. But around the same time, my sister began saying the quiet man was back. At breakfast, she would mention him casually while swinging her legs under the chair. He was near the sandbox last night. Or, he was closer to the deck this time. She never sounded dramatic when she said it. That was part of what made it so unnerving. She said it the same way a child might report a cat in the yard or a school friend she'd seen at the park. My mother asked what he looked like. My sister shrugged and said, "Like a dad, but wrong." That answer sat in the kitchen with us for a long time. My father asked whether he had ever tried to come inside. "No," she said. "He just watches to see if I'm sleeping." She was told gently not to make stories like that up. She insisted she wasn't. My mother moved the curtains in her room so they fully covered the lower part of the window. My father fixed a brighter bulb over the back deck. We all acted like we were handling something minor. Then my mother saw movement outside for herself. It was just after 10 on a Thursday. She was loading the dishwasher while my father watched television in the living room and I was upstairs pretending to study. She later said she only looked up because she thought she saw the reflection of someone walking behind her in the glass. When she turned, there was nobody in the kitchen. There was, however, a person standing in the backyard near the shrubs. He wasn't moving. He wasn't hiding. He was just there, half lit by the deck light. He turned toward the house with his arms hanging at his sides. My mother made a sound loud enough that my father came in running. By the time he reached the sliding door, the yard was empty. He went outside anyway, furious in the way people get when fear and embarrassment hit at the same time. He checked behind the shed, behind the grill, along the fence line, and near the gate. Nothing. No footsteps, no voice, no sign that anyone had just crossed the yard in seconds without being seen. The police came and did what they always seem to do in stories like this. They took it seriously enough to ask questions, but not seriously enough to seem alarmed. They walked the perimeter with flashlights, tested the gate, wrote down our names, and suggested it could have been someone cutting through yards or a teenager messing around. A teenager who stood silently outside a child's window at night. That possibility did not help. After that, my father installed a cheap camera over the deck and another pointed at the gate. He also drove 2 screws through the gate frame so it could only open from inside unless someone removed them. He made a show of being practical, but I could tell he was rattled. He stopped sitting with his back to the yard. He started pausing at the kitchen window before turning lights off. When the dog, a nervous beagle named Murphy, began growling low in his throat every time he was let out after dark, my father quit letting him out after dark at all. A week passed. Then the footage started. The first clip was almost boring. The camera over the deck recorded a few seconds of the yard at 2:13 a.m. The light flicked on. Murphy, who had been sleeping inside, started barking off-screen. The gate at the far side of the frame moved inward by an inch, then another inch, then slowly opened all the way. No one was visible. The camera captured the gate opening by itself, stopping and remaining that way for 19 seconds. Then it swung shut again. My father watched that clip 5 times in a row, saying less each time. He checked the timestamp, like maybe the answer was hidden there. He played it on the TV so the image was larger. We all stood in the living room staring at the open gate on screen and waiting for a person to step through, but nobody ever did. The next clip was worse. At 1:47 a.m., the backyard was empty. Then the deck light came on and a shadow crossed the far edge of the frame. Not a person fully visible. Just enough of one to prove someone had been standing where the camera angle couldn't catch him. A shoulder, part of an arm, the side of a head. He didn't move like someone sneaking past. He moved like someone leaning in to see how much of himself the camera could take. Then the footage froze for 2 seconds. When it resumed, the sandbox had been dragged 3 feet across the grass. It had not moved gradually. It was simply in one place, then in another. My sister was in the room when we watched it. She pointed at the screen and said, "That's him. He likes when people know he was there." That night, my parents let her sleep in their room. I wish I could say we left right then, but real life doesn't usually work like that. People hesitate. They explain things away because the alternative changes everything. My father said we needed better cameras. My mother said maybe we should stay with my aunt for a few nights. Then the next morning came with sunlight and coffee and the humiliating feeling that maybe all of us were building a nightmare together out of shadows and stress. Then we found the toy. It was sitting in the middle of the deck when my mother opened the blinds. A little plastic horse from my sister's room. Not one from the yard, not one left outside by accident. One from the shelf beside her bed upstairs. My father went pale in a way I had never seen before. He didn't ask whether my sister had carried it down. He knew she hadn't. We all knew she hadn't. She slept between my parents that night, and the toy box in her room had been untouched when my mother checked before bed. The police came again. This time they searched inside too. They found no broken lock, no forced window, no sign that anyone had entered. They were polite and increasingly skeptical. One officer asked whether my sister sleepwalked. Another asked whether any of us had a relative with mental health issues who might be trying to scare the family. My father nearly threw them out for that one. For the next 3 days, nothing happened. No movement on the cameras, no open gate, no stories from my sister. Then on Sunday night, the power went out. Not the whole block, just our house. Every light died at once, including the television and the digital clock over the stove. My father cursed, grabbed a flashlight, and checked the breakers in the basement. They were all on. From the window over the sink, we could see porch lights glowing in the neighbors' homes across the street. Only our house was dark. Murphy began barking at the back door so violently he slipped on the kitchen floor. My father aimed the flashlight through the glass. There was a man standing on the deck. For 1 second, the beam caught him fully. He was wearing dark clothes and standing so close to the door that he seemed almost flat in the glass, like a reflection that didn't belong to us. I remember his face less than I remembered the stillness of him. He didn't flinch when the light hit him. He didn't back away. He just looked in. Then the flashlight died. Not flickered, died. My mother screamed for us to get upstairs. My father shoved the handle of the door to make sure it was locked and rushed us toward the hall, while Murphy threw himself at the kitchen, barking and skidding. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard something from behind us. 3 knocks. Not on the back door, on the glass of my sister's downstairs playroom window, the one facing the deck. My father called 911 and kept us in the upstairs bathroom with the door shut until police arrived. When they searched outside, the deck was empty. But they found our power meter cover removed from the side of the house and a set of muddy prints near the playroom window. The prints led across the deck, down into the yard, and stopped at the sandbox. Stopped, not turned, not faded. Stopped, as if whoever had made them had simply ceased to exist there. The officers finally took it seriously after that. A patrol car began circling the street at night. My father bought stronger lights and longer screws for every strike plate in the house. My mother kept all the downstairs curtains closed, even during the day. My sister stopped talking about the quiet man completely, which somehow scared me more than when she had been describing him. Then came the last night. I woke up around 3 a.m. because Murphy was making a strange sound downstairs, not barking this time, but whining in short, panicked bursts. I got out of bed and opened my door. My parents' room was already open too. We all heard it together, a slow scraping sound, wood on wood. My father went to the landing and looked down toward the first floor. His whole body froze. I moved beside him before he could stop me. The sliding door was open, not shattered, not forced. Open by about a foot. The curtain breathing inward with the cold night air. Beyond it, the deck light was on, and sitting just outside the doorway, facing into the house, was my sister's plastic sandbox. It had been dragged from the far side of the yard and placed directly against the threshold. Inside the sandbox, neatly arranged in the sand, were every one of the plastic horses from my sister's bedroom shelf. All of them. My father ran downstairs. My mother grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. Murphy was crouched near the dining room, shaking and refusing to go any closer. My father slammed the sliding door shut and locked it, then looked around wildly for something. Anything. He shouted into the yard, voice cracking with rage. No answer came. Then he noticed the playroom window. It was open too. Only slightly, but enough. Whoever had been outside had not just come into our yard. He had been inside our house long enough to go upstairs into my sister's room, take every toy horse from her shelf, bring them back down, arrange them in the sandbox, drag the sandbox across the yard, open 2 entry points, and leave without making enough noise to wake us until the end. That realization changed the air in the entire house. It was no longer about someone watching from outside. It was about someone moving through our rooms while we slept, calm enough to create a scene. We left before sunrise and never spent another night there. Police processed the house for prints and found several, none good enough to identify. They found marks on the outer fence where someone had been climbing over from the undeveloped strip behind the property. They found one more thing under my sister's bed during the search, a folded piece of paper. On it, in block handwriting, were the words, "She knows to stay still now." My father never let my sister see that note. I only know because I overheard the detective reading it to my mother in the driveway. Years later, after we had moved and tried to turn it into one of those family stories nobody finishes, I asked my sister what she really remembered. I expected almost nothing. She had been 7, kids blur things. Fear edits memory. But she answered immediately. I remember why I called him the quiet man. I asked why. She looked at me for a long time before saying, because every time I saw him in the backyard, he already felt like he'd been in the house first.